Applied Magic by Dion. Chapter 1. Paths to Divine Mastery. The mystic way, leading to divine union, is of such renown that it frequently escapes memory that there exists an alternative path, outwardly distinct in its trajectory, yet ultimately culminating in the selfsame destination. We have grown so habituated to hearing worldly renunciation and self-abnegation extolled as the sole authentic path for the soul aspiring to the highest, that we scarcely venture to whisper of the possibility of another avenue, the path of the mastery over manifested existence and the apotheosis of the self. Two modes exist by which God may be venerated. One may worship him in his unmanifested essence, or one may worship him in his manifested form. Both approaches are legitimate, contingent upon the stipulation that while worshiping the manifested form, we do not neglect the essence, and while worshiping the essence, we do not conflate it with the manifested form, for such errors constitute the sin of idolatry, which resides in a misplaced emphasis. The mystic endeavors to worship God in essence. However, the essence or root of God, being unmanifest, evades human consciousness. Consequently, the mystic, to conceive the object of his adoration, must transcend ordinary human consciousness. It remains impossible to comprehend the innermost nature of a state of existence unless one can enter within it and partake, in some measure at least, of its experience. Thus, the mystic accepts as his task the liberation of his consciousness from its habitual servitude to form. It is toward this objective that ascetic discipline is directed, extinguishing the lower aspects so that the higher may be liberated to unite with God and thereby know him. The way of the mystic is a path of renunciation until he shatters all constraints of his lower nature and enters into his liberty. Nothing then remains to detain him from God, and his soul ascends to enter the light, returning nevermore. Conversely, the other path is not a route of renunciation, but a way of fulfillment. It constitutes not a severance from the trajectory of human destiny, but rather a concentration and sublimation of that destiny. Every soul that undertakes this path lives, through its own experience, every phase and aspect of manifested existence, equilibrating, spiritualizing, and absorbing its essence. The objective of those who pursue this path is to secure complete mastery over every facet of created life. Yet, when we speak of mastery, we do not imply the dominion of a slave owner over his chattel. Rather, we signify the mastery of the virtuoso over his instrument, a command that relies upon his capacity to adapt himself to its nature, enter into its spirit, and thus elicit its full potential for interpretation. The adept who has achieved dominion over the sphere of Luna interprets the message of the moon to the world and demonstrates her powers in equilibrated balance. The kingdom governed by the master of the temple is not an absolute monarchy. He does not acquire such mastery to compel thrones, dominions, and powers to serve himself, but to convey to them God's message of salvation and summon them to their high heritage. He acts as a servant of evolution. His duty is to extract order from chaos, harmony from discord, and to reduce unbalanced forces to equilibrium. The Vedanta teaching of the Eastern tradition clearly discerns between devotion to the unmanifest God, the spiritual essence of creation, and the manifesting aspects or gods. Should one identify the self with the partial aspects, which are the yoginis, the various powers or siddhis are attained. Identify the self with the Mahayogini herself, and man finds liberation, for he is no longer man. This is the subsequent inquiry we must pose to ourselves. The response to this depends wholly upon the stage of evolution at which we have arrived. The soul must consummate its human experience before it becomes prepared for divine union. It must traverse the nadir of the descent into matter before it may embark upon the path of return. We are not prepared for the mystic way until we approach the moment of our liberation from the wheel of birth and death. To attempt an escape from that will prematurely is to evade our training. Like the racing yacht that fails to round the outermost marking buoy, we are disqualified. We have not fulfilled the conditions of liberation, which mandate that we shall shirk nothing and leave behind us only that which we have mastered, equilibrated, and outgrown. It is a spurious teaching that bids us eradicate from our natures anything God has implanted therein, as fallacious and imprudent as hamstringing a spirited thoroughbred colt simply because it is wild and unbroken. The love of beauty, the vitalizing impulse of clean, normal, healthy instinct, the joy of battle, we would be impoverished creatures indeed without all these. God bestowed them upon us, and we may presume He understood His purpose when He did so. Who are we to judge His handiwork and condemn that which He deemed good? What God's law prohibits is the abuse of these attributes, not their utilization for the purposes for which they were intended. The path of the hearthfire provides a far sounder and more effectual discipline of the instincts than the hermit caves of Thebes, with their ascetic tortures and self-mutilations, which do violence to nature and outrage God's handiwork. Alarmed by the elemental forces when he encounters them unpurified and unprepared, the ascetic flees from what he perceives to be temptation. It is a far sounder policy to equilibrate the warring forces within our own nature until we can manage our unruly team of instincts and compel them to draw the chariot of the soul with the power of their untiring velocity. The day will arrive for each of us when we shall be liberated from the wheel of birth and death and enter the light to return nevermore. If we attempt to set aside the elements and their associated difficulties before that day dawns, we are shifting our helm for the homeward course before we have rounded the marking buoy. We are akin to the man who buried his talent in the earth because he feared it. Our Lord will not thank us for our misplaced devotion to an unripe ideal, but rather will deem us unprofitable servants. The key to the entire problem, as with so many others, resides in the doctrine of reincarnation. If we hold the belief that all human achievement must be accomplished within a single lifetime and that at its conclusion we shall be judged, we are liable to be stampeded into an idealism we have not yet attained through a process of natural growth. Freedom from the wheel, the abandonment of matter, and divine union, these will arrive for all of us in the due course of evolutionary time, for it is the aim of evolution to bring us to them. However, that time may not be yet, and we are exceedingly foolish if we permit another, however advanced, to judge for us where we stand upon the ladder of evolution and decide what is to be our next step. Let us possess the courage of our convictions and follow our own deeper promptings. If our impulse is to worship God in His glorious manifestation, let us do so wholeheartedly. Therein lies the way of attainment for us. This does not signify the unleashing of impulses. The dance of nature is an ordered and rhythmical movement, and we must not break from our position in the living pattern lest we despoil it. We must labor with nature for nature's ends if she is to be our mother. Here is discipline sufficient for any soul. If, conversely, our promptings incline towards a withdrawal onto the mystical path, let us ask ourselves honestly whether we are pursuing that path because the call of God in our hearts is so potent, or because we have found life so arduous that we desire to escape forever from its tribulations. Chapter 2. Occult Principles in Life. Upon my initial foray into the study of occult science, the subject was obscured by extreme secrecy and concealment. The various public societies then in existence were either purely exoteric and elementary in nature, or else they were entirely fraudulent. Consequently, it was arduous to ascertain where one might discover authentic instruction. Therefore, unless one possessed psychic faculties, one was effectively precluded from acquiring any knowledge. However, this situation no longer obtains to the same degree, yet the dilemma persists for many individuals. Do they desire the occult teaching or do they not? We are so accustomed to the notion that, to possess any practical knowledge of occultism, one must sequester oneself from the world. Indeed, for the vast majority of the populace, it is impracticable to pursue such a path at all. This implied that a multitude of individuals, who might have derived significant benefit from this teaching, were debarred from pursuing its study, a circumstance which I consider lamentable. During the period of my own training, it was an altogether strenuous undertaking. The more I observe the subject, the more I am convinced that the work of the adept is one distinct matter, while the general dissemination of the teaching is quite another. The feats performed by the accomplished gymnast are entirely beyond the scope of the ordinary man. Nevertheless, the identical exercises upon which the gymnast is disciplined, provided they are not carried to the same extreme pitch, serve to maintain the ordinary man in a state of strength and fitness when practiced with regularity. Thus, I believe, is the case with occultism. Should you desire to become an adept and perform the potent feats of magic, you are analogous to the professional gymnast, and this necessitates a most rigorous training. However, I posit that the subsequent application of this work will be the dissemination of these teachings, rendering them available to those unable to renounce all worldly ties, whose karma binds them to mundane existence. It is noteworthy that at the time when the recrudescence of occultism commenced, if one examines the healing movement of Christian Science, one observes that it possesses a highly efficacious methodology, yet its practitioners can seldom elucidate it. Occultism constitutes the scientific basis of all these movements and is capable of explaining the phenomena of these varying modes of experience and practice. It is therein that its value resides. Christian Science and New Thought do indeed yield valuable fruits, but they offer no rationalization that a thinking person can accept, and yet they achieve their results. Therefore, one must ascertain that basis, and not dispense with the valuable results. I maintain that within the esoteric doctrines, we acquire an explanation for so much of existence that everyone would be richer for having received them. Life becomes a vastly different matter if we possess a clue to its significance. Devoid of this, we are akin to leaves blown in the wind. We know not where we are nor whither we are bound. We are blind and wandering as best we may, groping our way with no guarantee that we shall not plummet over a precipice. However, if we embrace the esoteric doctrines, we perceive ourselves as part of the greater whole. We discern our place in nature, we perceive whence we have come and whither we are going, and we perceive our relationship to the cosmos. Thus, the totality of life opens up. That is what esoteric science can bestow. A very broad, profound, and practical application of occultism. My experience with numerous esoteric scientists is as follows. They engage in a sort of intellectual study of the subject, yet they fail to apply it to practical problems. They are more or less engaged in research work, in studying symbol systems, the Kabbalah, etc., but, except as a means for divination, these studies are, for them, of no practical application to life. Moreover, these divinations are generally quite spurious and tend to demoralize an individual's outlook on existence. If a fortunate or unfortunate event is destined to befall a person shortly, what benefit is derived from informing them of it? Rather, they can find the explanation of things in an interpretation of life. When we study the esoteric teachings of evolution, we perceive a tremendous vista opening before us. Furthermore, the belief in reincarnation is implicit in occultism, as is the belief in thought transference. Therein we possess, I believe, one of the most illuminating teachings that can possibly be applied to the problems of life. What can any being achieve in a single lifetime to merit either heaven or hell for eternity? Surely the teaching of reincarnation is the more reasonable one. The departure and the return, and the venturing forth once more into incarnation for further experience. That is, to my mind, a most magnificent concept of existence, that behind us stretches a long chain of incarnations. We do not recall them because the continuity of memory is broken, but they exist, and the divine spark is the nucleus of each one of us, around which experience has constructed a whole. This constitutes the temperament and capacities of each individual. That concept provides us with a profound philosophy of life. If the fortunes of life were blind hazard, then indeed we would be most wretched. But if we perceive that the broad parameters of the spiritual experiences that life brings us are determined by our own soul, we shall begin to understand how to receive them. Then arises another question, the great esoteric doctrine of the invisible planes of existence. These teachings inform us that what the five senses perceive or contact does not constitute the totality of existence. This exoteric science can corroborate by means of the microscope and similar instruments. However, the occultist transcends this and asserts that there is an entire kingdom of mind and spirit as well, which one does not perceive with physical senses. In these realms reside the great forces which actuate life and its circumstances. Within it, you will discover the key to conditions of life on the physical plane, and you will never discover it elsewhere. Such individuals as Ku are manipulating these invisible forces successfully. If we understand these conditions, we shall be free. We shall then be able to work with these forces and manipulate them ourselves. However, we can manipulate them only within very circumscribed limits. Christian Science sets no limits, but if we observe the results they obtain, we can discern that limits exist. There are certain matters with which it is wise not to meddle. The occultist does not attempt to dominate nature, but rather to bring himself into harmony with these great cosmic forces, and to work in concert with them. You may observe an illustration of this if you watch the Thames barges pushing off when the tide is on the turn. They are taking advantage of their knowledge of the tides, and the river accomplishes the rest. With us in life, we should possess the same knowledge and wisdom. We ought to understand these natural laws of the unseen. They are natural laws, and there is nothing supernatural about them. We can render life a vastly different thing if we do understand them. Naturally, there are certain conditions we must accept, which are the fruits of karma, but I do not wish you to interpret karma in the crude manner in which it is sometimes presented. It is not a question of a life for a life, that if you steal from a person in this incarnation, that same person will steal from you in the next. It is not as simple as that. It implies that something in your nature must be realized and transformed so that you shall be in harmony. As long as that particular factor remains in your nature, it will precipitate a similar variety of tribulation in your life. Errors of intention and deliberate wrongdoing are usually paid for in future lives. You may escape consequence in this life. We have all seen the wicked flourish like a green bay tree, but the effect of that persists. It is recorded in your account, and in due time you must pay. But the payment is always in spiritual values. One ascertains that one must effect specific adjustments, and when this is accomplished, the pressure abates and one is rendered free. Thus, point by point, we acquire character and equilibrium. We secure our liberation by assimilating the lessons existence imposes upon us. Should we refuse them, the consequences become increasingly drastic. When individuals have attained a certain degree of development, they possess heightened sensitivity and greater spiritual force, rendering their tribulations more acute. The soul may have elected to advance rapidly, thereby precipitating in a concentrated form all the karma that is due. Adversity appears invariably to descend upon such a spirit, and through an incarnation of tribulation the soul is purified, ensuring that the subsequent incarnation unfolds liberated from these conditions. A solitary incarnation fails to furnish us with a just accounting, leaving us instead with a sense of inequity. However, if we perceive the expanse of all our past lives, we view the matter differently. We ought always to view circumstances in the light of 3 lives. Furthermore, we are capable of achieving our objectives within the span of 3 lives as well. We are forging the conditions for our subsequent existence at this very moment, although in the present, we are compelled to accept all or a portion of the karma remaining from our previous one. Certain individuals may assert, surely, a single life is arduous enough. However, there exists an alternative perspective. If we average our tribulations against the vast eons of our total existence, they assume a distinct proportion. A profound sense of freedom descends upon the soul when the actual realization dawns that the I endures, and that this specific incarnation is merely an incidental episode in its career. We cannot bestow that freedom upon another simply by elucidating the logical grounds. Rather, a sudden realization arrives regarding something that has existed previously, causing a significant alteration of life's values. Furthermore, if we inspect our life's difficulties, we may discover that they exist because we are resolving matters rapidly and developing at an accelerated pace. We declare, this is the material condition that afflicts us. Therefore, we required it, and we must assimilate the lessons it was sent to impart. We endeavor to interpret the spiritual significance of this experience. Let us develop our souls through meditation upon it. When the soul has acquired this quality or mastered the lesson it was required to learn, the karmic burden is forthwith lifted. When individuals confront their conditions, those conditions do not alter until the requisite freedom is won. We imagine we would be content if only specific circumstances were altered. Yet this is not so, for the conditions reside within ourselves, and would merely summon other similar conditions in return. When I was employed in a nerve clinic, we observed this phenomenon repeatedly. The same sort of tribulation recurred persistently within the same life. There was one woman who had been assaulted by vagrants 3 or 4 times during her existence. This is an occurrence that does not befall everyone in the ordinary course of affairs. Alternatively, a woman may continually fall under the dominion of a bully and be treated with cruelty, first by a father, subsequently by a husband, and finally within her professional sphere. We witness one particular form of adversity recurring repeatedly in a single individual's life. There must exist some element that determines this recurring experience. If the majority of us retrospectively examine our own lives, we can discern this pattern to some extent at the very least. There must reside some prominent factor within our own constitution which attracts these invisible forces. The sole method of addressing these issues is by altering one's character through meditation, by constructing thought forms, or by deliberately destroying what we term the thought forms that serve as channels for these undesirable influences directed toward you. These constitute the practical applications of occultism, and we require not the status of adepts to employ them. We are generating thought forms in one manner or another incessantly. Our thoughts not only influence us, but they also establish channels of ingress and attract corresponding forces within the cosmos itself. If you surround yourself with thoughts of hatred, you will attract a sort of cosmic hatred to yourself. The occultist possesses a system for classifying these forces. He calculates all these matters with precision. We possess such a system in the Kabbalistic tree of life, and the beliefs underlying it can prove invaluable in life. They demonstrate the tremendous power of the mind and the strict limits within which it operates, by means of which we can achieve so much. These doctrines should permeate thought increasingly. The Theosophical Society has accomplished significant work in this regard, yet its appeal has been directed chiefly toward the unorthodox and the rebellious. This represents a substantial loss, for these teachings should and can be presented in such a manner that they do not estrange the trained mind, which is indispensable in the realm of pure science. Modern physics is aligning completely with occult teachings. The assertions made by Blavatsky, for which she was derided with scorn, are now becoming matters of pure physics. There exist profound applications of these principles which must be implemented. They should be applied to sociology and to the administration of prisons and asylums, where the established thought forms reinfect individuals unless we neutralize them. We may consider its practical applications to medicine, for which it holds the only genuine keys. If one addresses man solely as a physical body, the result is highly unsatisfactory. Equally, if we adopt the orthodox view and treat man solely as a spirit, we fail to do him justice. Auto-intoxication and sin are distinct concepts. Man is a fourfold being, and one must treat him as such. One must discern the level upon which the affliction originates. The life forces of the spiritual level constitute the true keys to the entire problem. These life forces are translated through the intellect and the understanding, and subsequently brought down through the planes. These represent some of the esoteric teachings from which anyone may derive profit. I believe the primary necessity for occult secrecy has largely passed, yet a degree of it remains requisite. This is partly because a group mind is necessary for certain forms of practical occultism. This energy must be conserved rather than dissipated, as occurs when a subject becomes common property and knowledge, and also to safeguard individuals against popular prejudice. Madame David Neal, in her volumes concerning Tibet, has informed us that there exists no secrecy regarding the teaching of the lamas and the inner wisdom therein. The matters that are kept secret are the practical methods of training their students. She herself, in her writings, has disseminated many teachings that serve as critical keys to the understanding of numerous occult doctrines. There exist no mysteries concerning the teachings, but only concerning the practical methods with which individuals could cause harm. Thus, we perceive that the practical work of occultism can be executed only by trained minds and requires a high degree of discipline. However, the principles themselves can be most valuable, and the more widely these are disseminated, the better. Chapter 3. Dynamics of Collective Consciousness. The designation group mind is frequently employed with imprecision among occultists, as though it were synonymous with group soul. These two concepts are, however, fundamentally disparate. The group soul constitutes the primordial raw material of mental substance from which individual consciousness is differentiated through experience. Conversely, the group mind is constructed from the aggregate contributions of numerous individualized consciousnesses focusing upon a singular concept. Let us examine a tangible illustration to elucidate this point. During the zenith of his popularity, Marshal Joffre visited England and was accorded a rapturous reception. Whilst journeying from his hotel to the mansion house to be received by the Lord Mayor, his vehicle traversed numerous thoroughfares. Individuals identified him and gazed intently, yet no collective demonstration ensued. However, upon his arrival at the congested mansion house crossing, constables halted the traffic and offered salutes. The multitude perceived that an event of significance was transpiring. He was recognized, his name circulated from person to person, and in an instant, a surge of unbridled fervor erupted. Composed, placid individuals were swept away by the tide of excitement, finding themselves shouting and brandishing their hats with the intensity of frenzied zealots. Observe the distinction between the behavior of the crowd when functioning as a collective entity and the deportment of isolated individuals, however numerous, who merely gazed with interest yet evinced no emotion. This occurrence evokes another incident at the mansion house, one highly illustrative of crowd psychology and the group mind. Many years prior, Abdul Hamid, the reviled Sultan of Turkey, visited England. He, too, was received by the Lord Mayor and traveled to the mansion house. Precisely the same scenes were reenacted, albeit with a divergent emotional content. He proceeded in safety through the thronged streets, individuals staring agape at the infamous visitor yet offering no demonstration. However, when traffic was arrested for his passage at the mansion house crossing and the multitude recognized him, a howl of execration ascended from those sedate, sober, middle-aged city gentlemen, resembling the cry of a lupin pack. The crowd surged forward as a single entity, and it was only with the utmost difficulty that he was preserved from being forcibly extracted from his carriage. Which of those individual city gentlemen, unadventurous clerks satisfied with their sedentary labors, would have assaulted the aged and august Abdul Hamid unilaterally? Yet, when ensnared in the surge of collective emotion, they were capable of launching a savage offensive amidst a babel of feral vociferations. For that moment, something akin to an obsessing entity took possession of the souls of one and all. A vast presence possessing a character that was not merely the summation of the individual souls, but rather something more expansive, more potent, and more fiercely and vividly alive to its own impulses. Yet, at ordinary times, the thronging crowds at the mansion house crossing pursue their respective paths, absorbed in their private ruminations, indifferent to and oblivious of their neighbors. What agency transformed this mass of hastening, detached units into a cohesive band elevated by the enthusiasm of an ideal, or into an organism capable of perilous violence? The crux of the situation lies in the direction of the attention of a plurality of individuals toward a common object regarding which they all harbor intense and identical sentiments. The direction of attention toward a common object in the absence of emotion does not produce the same effect. The illuminated signs of Piccadilly Circus, though crowds stand and observe them, do not precipitate the formation of a group mind. With these data at our disposal, let us consider the problem within its occult applications. What is this enigmatic oversoul that forms and disperses so swiftly when a number of individuals are of one mind in a single location? For an explanation, we must examine the theory of artificial elementals. An artificial elemental is a thought form animated by elemental essence. That essence may be drawn directly from the elemental kingdoms, or it may be derived from the magician's own aura. A thought form constructed through sustained visualization and concentration, and concerning which a potent emotion is felt, becomes imbued with that emotion and is capable of an independent existence distinct from the consciousness of its creator. This constitutes a factor of paramount importance in practical occultism and provides the explanation for many of its phenomena. Precisely the identical process that leads to the formation of an artificial elemental by a magician occurs when a number of persons concentrate with emotion upon a single object. They generate an artificial elemental, vast and potent in proportion to the magnitude of the crowd and the intensity of its sentiments. This elemental possesses a pronounced mental atmosphere of its own, and this atmosphere exerts a powerful influence over the feelings of every person participating in the collective emotion. It transmits telepathic suggestions to them, resonating the note of its own being in their ears and thereby reinforcing the emotional vibration which originally engendered it. There exists action and reaction, mutual stimulus and intensification between the elemental and its creators. The more the crowd concentrates upon its object of emotion, the more immense the elemental becomes. And the more immense it becomes, the stronger the mass suggestions it imparts to the individuals composing the crowd that created it, who, receiving this suggestion, find their feelings intensified. Thus it is that mobs are capable of deeds of passion from which every individual member would recoil with horror. A mob elemental, however, disperses as rapidly as it forms because a mob possesses no temporal continuity of existence. The moment the stimulus of a common emotion is withdrawn, the mob ceases to be a unit and reverts to heterogeneity. That is why undisciplined armies, however enthusiastic, are unreliable martial instruments. Their enthusiasm evaporates if it is not continually stimulated, and they fragment into their component parts of numerous individuals with divergent interests, each activated by the instinct of self-preservation. To construct a group mind of any endurance, some method of ensuring continuity of attention and feeling is essential. Whenever such continuity of attention and feeling has been established, a group mind or group elemental is formed, which, with the passage of time, develops an individuality of its own and ceases to be dependent for its existence upon the attention and emotion of the crowd that engendered it. Once this occurs, the crowd no longer possesses the power to withdraw its attention or to disperse. The group elemental holds it in its thrall. The attention of each individual is attracted and captured notwithstanding his volition. Feelings are stirred within him even should he desire not to feel them. Each newcomer to the group enters into this potent atmosphere and either accepts it, thereby being absorbed into the group, or rejects it, and is himself subsequently rejected. No member of a group possessing a compelling atmosphere, group mind or elemental, according to which nomenclature we prefer, is at liberty to think without bias upon the objects of group concentration and emotion. It is for this reason that reforms are so arduous to implement. The more vast the organization requiring reform, the more resistant it is to alteration, and the stronger must be the personality that attempts the task. Yet, once that forceful personality has begun to make an impression, he rapidly discovers that a group is gathering under his leadership, and that this, in its turn, is developing an elemental. Thus, the momentum he has originated begins to propel him. When he falters in his leadership, the movement he created forces him onward. The solitary individual may turn aside and pause in moments of doubt and discouragement. Not so the leader of a strongly emotionalized group. As soon as he decelerates his pace, he feels the pressure of the group mind behind him, and it carries him forward during his hours of weakness and darkness. Conversely, should his stratagem be imprudently conceived, this same force may transport him uncontrollably and shatter him upon the shoals of an erroneous policy, the folly of which he would have discerned had he contemplated the subject with rationality. There exists no means to arrest the momentum of a movement advancing in alignment with the trajectories of evolution. The group mind of the participants establishes a conduit for the manifestation of evolutionary forces, and the momentum thus generated becomes irresistible. Nevertheless, however potent the personality, however vast the resources, and however popular the slogans, should the movement stand in opposition to cosmic law, it is merely a question of time before the entire collective precipitously rushes down a steep declivity into the abyss. For in such an instance, it is the very momentum accumulated that serves as the agent of its annihilation. Afford a spurious movement sufficient latitude, and it will inevitably bring about its own demise, collapsing under its own gravity once it has grown sufficiently top-heavy to overbalance itself. This factor of the group mind constitutes an exceedingly significant key to the comprehension of human dilemmas and elucidates the irrationality of men in the aggregate. There exist several highly illuminating treatises upon this subject, notably The Psychology of the Herd in Peace and War by Wilfred Trotter, and The Group Mind by William McDougall. These works will amply repay study for the illumination they cast upon the problems of quotidian existence and human nature. The occultist extends the practical application of the doctrine of group minds far beyond the limits observed by the psychologist. Therein he discovers the key to the potency of the mysteries. When contemplated with an understanding of crowd psychology, it becomes apparent that the methodology of the mysteries and the secret fraternities of all ages is founded upon practical experience of these realities. What could be more conducive to the formation of a formidable group mind than the secrecy, the distinctive vestments, the processions, and the chantings of an occult ritual? Any factor that differentiates a number of individuals from the mass and segregates them establishes a group mind automatically. The more a group is segregated, and the greater the distinction between it and the remainder of mankind, the stronger is the group mind thus engendered. Consider the magnitude of the group mind of the Jewish race, set apart by ritual, by custom, by temperament, and by persecution. There exists nothing comparable to persecution for imparting vitality to a group mind. Verily, the blood of martyrs is the seed of the Church, for it serves as the cement of the group mind. It is for this reason that the secrecy of the mysteries shall never be entirely abrogated. However much is divulged, something must invariably remain in reserve and shrouded in secrecy. For this element, unshared with others and the focus of the group's attention, constitutes the nucleus of the group mind. It is to the group mind what the grain of sand is to the pearl forming within the oyster. Were there no grain of sand, there would be no pearl. Remove that which differentiates the initiate from the rest of men, and the group mind of which he forms a part will disintegrate. The potency of ceremonial, physically enacted, resides not solely in its appeal to the entity invoked, but also in its appeal to the imaginations of the participants. An adept, laboring in solitude, will perform a ritual in picture consciousness upon the astral plane without departing from his meditation posture, and this ritual will prove effective for the purposes of invocation. However, should he desire to create an atmosphere wherein the development of his pupils will advance as in a forcing house, or should he wish to elevate his own consciousness beyond its normal limitations, transcending his own willpower and unaided vision, he will utilize the powers of the group elemental developed by ritual. This group mind, or ritual elemental, acts upon the participants in the ceremony in precisely the same manner as the mob emotion acted upon the peaceful city men when they beheld Marshal Joffre. They are elevated beyond themselves. They become more than human for the moment, for a group elemental formed of the appropriate emotion is just as capable of exalting consciousness to the level of the angels as of degrading it to the level of the beasts. When our emotion is directed intensely towards an object, we pour forth a subtle yet nevertheless potent form of force. If that emotion is not a mere blind effusion but formulates itself into the concept of performing an action, and especially if that concept causes a dramatic mental picture to arise in the mind, the outpouring force is formulated into a thought form. The mental picture is ensouled by the projected force and becomes an actuality upon the astral plane. This thought form itself subsequently begins to emit vibrations, and these vibrations, by the law of the sympathetic induction of vibration, tend to reinforce the sentiments of the individual whose emotion engendered them, and to induce similar sentiments in others present whose attention is directed towards the same object, even if they have hitherto remained disinterested onlookers. It will be observed that the theory of the group mind is now being associated with the doctrine of autosuggestion as formulated by Baudouin, and these two established psychological concepts are extended by association with the esoteric concept of telepathy. Consider these three factors in conjunction, and we possess the key not only to the phenomena of mob psychology but also to the little realized power of ritual, particularly ritual as it is enacted within an occult lodge. Let us consider what transpires when such a ritual is performed. All those present have their attention riveted upon the drama of the presentation of the ceremony. Every object within the range of their vision is symbolic of the idea that is being expressed by the ceremony. No circumstance that can heighten the concentration and the emotion is neglected. Consequently, a highly concentrated and highly energized group is established. As we have already ascertained, when one contemplates any object with emotion, force is poured forth. If a number of individuals are contemplating the same object with emotion, their attention concentrated and their feelings exalted by the ritual of the ceremony, they are pouring into a common reservoir no inconsiderable measure of subtle force. It is this force which constitutes the basis for the manifestation of whatever potency is being invoked. In religions where the gods or the saints are freely represented in pictorial form, the imaginations of the worshippers are accustomed to visualizing them as they have seen them represented, whether it be the hawk-headed Horus or the Virgin Mary. When a number of devout worshippers are gathered together, their emotions concentrated and exalted by ritual, and all holding the same image in their imagination, the outpoured force of all present is formed into an astral simulacrum of the being thus intensely pictured. When this process has been repeated regularly over considerable periods, the images that have been constructed remain upon the astral plane in precisely the same manner that a habit track is formed in the mind by the repeated performance of the same action. In this form, the natural force remains permanently concentrated. Consequently, subsequent worshippers need be at no great pains to formulate the simulacrum. They have only to contemplate the God, and they perceive his power. It is in this manner that all anthropomorphic representations of the Godhead have been established. If we reflect for a moment, we shall discern that the Holy Ghost is neither a flame nor a dove. Neither is the maternal earth aspect of nature either Isis or Ceres or the Virgin Mary. Such are the specific modalities through which the human intellect endeavors to comprehend these abstract realities. Indeed, the more primitive and undeveloped the mentality, the coarser the resultant symbol. Those who possess a profound understanding of these abstruse workings of the human psyche, whether they be the Egyptian priest, the Eleusinian hierophant, or the modern occultist, employ their command of this rarefied psychology to engineer an environment wherein the individual consciousness may transcend its own nature, shattering its inherent limitations to emerge into a more expansive ether. Chapter 4. The Mechanism of Ceremony. During the era of the Reformation, the architects of the Anglican liturgy failed to comprehend the psychological profundity inherent in the Roman ceremonial. Perceiving it in a state of degradation as a vacuous vessel, they dismantled the conduit upon the premise that it was devoid of sustenance. Let us exhibit greater sagacity in our own generation, and rather than fracturing the conduit, let us re-establish its connection with the original wellspring. A spiritual reality exists behind the external structures of organized religion, and it is this reality alone that endows them with intrinsic worth. These forms are not intended as a mere discipline for the training of the soul, nor solely as a medium for propitiating the divine, but are designed to facilitate the bringing of the light of the Spirit to a precise focus within human consciousness. Should we comprehend the psychology of ritual, we shall find ourselves neither enslaved by superstition nor in a state of insurrection against vacuous formalities. We shall recognize that a form serves as the conduit for a force. However, it is not merely the material substance utilized in a sacrament that constitutes the physical channel for such energy, but also the vivid pictorial image engendered in the mind of the worshipper through its ritualistic application. It is toward the power residing behind the symbol that we must direct our gaze when we seek to ascertain the validity of the Church's forms. The outward and visible sign, whether chalice or cross, serves merely as the focal point of attention, enabling the worshipper to establish psychic contact with the specific form of spiritual force that constitutes the animating essence of that symbol. We must acquire the discipline to look to psychology, rather than to history, for an elucidation of the significance inherent in the symbols and rituals of the Church. That which is commemorated is not a mundane occurrence, but a spiritual reaction. Furthermore, it is only to the extent that we ourselves generate that interior reaction that we participate in the efficacy of the act which served as its prototype. The crucifixion of our Lord at the hands of Roman authority was but the shadow cast upon the material plane by the conflict then transpiring within the spiritual realm. It was not the shedding of the blood of Jesus of Nazareth that redeemed humanity, but rather the outpouring of spiritual power from the mind of Jesus the Christ. The symbolism commemorating his death compels us to concentrate our attention upon the sacrifice of the cross and the labor it accomplished for the human race. The racial subconsciousness of Christian peoples is profoundly imbued with that ideal, and when we contemplate the symbol universally associated with it, we awaken the subconscious train of ideation that stirs deep racial memories. The ritual that compels a congregation to focus its attention utilizes the mechanism of the group mind. It is a well-established fact that the group mind, when under the influence of rage or fear, is capable of inciting panics and lynchings of which the individual members composing that crowd are entirely incapable. The same principle applies to the impulses of the spiritual life. A congregation acts as an organized crowd with its attention riveted, by appeals to all five physical senses, upon a singular focus, the sacrifice of the Mass. Consequently, the group emotion thus engendered is capable of elevating the group mind to heights which the individuals composing that congregation are incapable of achieving unaided. It must not be presumed that such an explication of the psychological aspect of the power of the Eucharist is intended in any manner to detract from the recognition of its divine aspect. Rather, it is solely intended to demonstrate the manner in which spiritual forces operate upon the level of the mind. If we desire to comprehend the modus operandi of the spiritual forces, we are required to distinguish between the spiritual and the mental. It is the confounding of these two categories of psychology that leads to such extensive misapprehension. The power of God must be embodied within a concrete idea if it is to be apprehended by the untrained human intellect. Hence arises the necessity for the Incarnation, which presented God to humanity in a form that could be readily grasped. Thus, the sacraments of the Church serve as incarnations, or embodiments in form, of primary spiritual truths that are otherwise too abstract to be apprehended by the untutored mind. By means of their pictorial symbolism, the mind is empowered to contemplate that which, unaided, it could never conceive. This contemplation enables the mind to link itself with the spiritual potency that performs the work shadowed forth by the priest upon the physical plane. Thus linked in thought, spiritual power pours into the soul and accomplishes its divine work. There are, therefore, three aspects to a sacrament. First, the formless power of God translated from the abstract to the concrete by our Lord. Secondly, the symbolic ritual that reminds us of that particular function of our Lord's work. And thirdly, the image formed within our imagination. When this final element takes form in consciousness, the circuit is completed, and our Lord has placed us in communion with God. Chapter 5. Polarity and Magnetic Flux. It is no facile task to convey Eastern thought to Western readers, principally because the lexicographical equivalents of the terminology employed diverge substantially from their true significance within mystical contemplation. It is a fact well established among those who have advanced beyond the outer court in these disciplines that a specific employment of language, a double entendre, as it were, is invariably adopted whenever matters of practical procedure are under discourse. This serves to prevent the once born from discovering the abbreviated paths to the soul's secret recesses. It is both proper and imperative that this precautionary measure be exercised, and it shall be strictly observed throughout these pages. For these abbreviated paths constitute potent psychological mechanisms. They are susceptible to employment by the uncommitted as readily as by the dedicated, and should they be utilized by individuals possessing unpurified and undisciplined intellects, the consequences could prove calamitous for others as well as for themselves. While I would be the last to deny an adult the prerogative to scorch his own fingers should he so desire, I deem it prudent to withhold from him the instrumentalities capable of igniting conflagrations among his fellows. A further impediment to transmitting Eastern thought to Western audiences resides in the reality that the fundamental attitudes toward existence in the East and the West are wholly distinct. This divergence is strikingly illustrated by the sacred architecture of the respective hemispheres. In the West, the central emblem serves to commemorate suffering. In the East, conversely, it commemorates joy. The men and women conditioned by these emblems naturally evaluate the experiences of existence in disparate manners. As Kipling so accurately observed, the wildest dreams of Kew are the facts of Kathmandu, and the crimes of Clapham chased in Martaban. The optimal approach to Eastern thought is undoubtedly through the medium of a classical education. The Greek and the Hindu would encounter no difficulty in comprehending one another. Each possesses an identical concept of nature and maintains the same regard for asceticism as a means to an end, rather than as an end in itself. Eastern thought, however, has penetrated far more profoundly into natural religion than the Greeks possessed the capacity to achieve, and the mysteries of Dionysus and Ceres are but pale shadows of their Eastern prototypes. In this connection, it may prove not without value to examine that which is known concerning the origin of the Greek mysteries. It is believed, and for the grounds. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.